Hello, this is Fam Electric Ghost. We have Coma Rose on.
Hi.
Uh, so
I'm good.
you're good. So I didn't get where you're actually located. Where are you residing?
Right, so I'm currently in France right now. I'm usually based in New York. I was supposed to go back in March, but I sort of felt like shit would hit the fan there, and I,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It did. It did. So you probably could have made a good decision. Um, so let me do a little brief intro. This is Phantom Electric Ghost. I'm a electronic musician and producer and podcaster. We've been doing this podcast on Anchor FM since 2018. And we've got about 23,000 listeners worldwide. And we interview indie artists around the world. And we're talking to Coma Rose. And you're in France right now. And we sent you a list of the questions. So we're going to probably start through that. I'm kind of in lockdown in New Hampshire in my home studio, uh, interviewing and recording a lot. But when did you first get into music? Like what age?
well, I suppose both my parents are musicians, and so music has always been quite a part of my life. But I never really started writing my own material until about last year. I mean, I did have a small band when I was like 11, but we only did about 10 gigs.
Yeah, well, I think, yeah. I mean, I started when I was probably like 14, 15 in my basement with my brother on guitar and me on boards and a drummer that we had from our high school band. Um, yeah, so a lot of people that I've talked to, they started at a young age. So, what instruments did you start on?
I actually started on guitar, and then I realized I was playing mainly bass lines, and so I was like, okay, just switch to the bass. And then I kind of stopped doing music entirely for a while because it just felt, well, see, I'm quite shy usually, and so music can feel a bit vulnerable, like putting it
Yeah.
out there, and so I felt like maybe it wasn't for me. And so I stopped for a while, but I've always sung like under the shower and things, so it
So
that's
you
always
decided
something.
in the last year, you decided you had like a talent where you wanted to actually start doing your own independent music. Is that the case that you decided? Well, now you felt confident enough to like start writing your own material.
Yeah, I guess somehow I did. I was working as an AV technician, like backstage for bands and things, and just a bit out of the blue, I started working on Ableton on my own just for fun, and I realized that actually it didn't seem too far fetched that maybe I could bring something to the room.
That's interesting because yeah, a lot of musicians that have last 3 years, they've all talked about how they were kind of shy, they were reserved, but the music kind of allows them to kind of have their own voice and kind of be able to do what maybe they're not comfortable doing in other parts of life and actually take center stage and become this other version of themselves. That's what I've seen. It's a lot of artists. It is you. A lot of times, like every singer songwriter has elements of themselves in their music, but they tend to have like a stage persona that they create. That's a little bit of a cover. Like, do you see it that way? Do you see like with Coma Rose, is this like it's a version of yourself, or you feel like you're playing a character, or do you feel like how do you feel how you're presenting your stagecraft?
I suppose so. Yeah, really accurate with the stage persona thing. I suppose that's why quite a few prominent artists go by like aliases and besides just their own band names. And I guess that really helps sort of bringing out a different aspect of yourself. And yeah, I kind of try to embody more of an alien kind of
Mm-hmm.
like Sixth Element inspired vibe. Um,
Yeah, it feels like a little like a Lady Gaga kind of persona. Or I always go back to like Bowie. Bowie was the big
right. Yeah.
theatrical inspiration for a lot of people in our generation. Or I mean, I'm probably different. I'm in my 50s, but what I found is like guys like Freddie Mercury, guys like David Bowie, even Lou Reed. they created this kind of stage persona, that wasn't exactly who they were, and it kind of gave them a little cover to do, things that you okay. Was that really Lou Reed? Is that his real life, or is he kind of just talking about characters? Ziggy Stardust isn't really Bowie. The Thin White Duke really isn't Bowie. Aladdin Sane isn't really Bowie, or is it? You don't know. You're kind of like, okay. And I think Bowie one time said that if I just went out with my blue jeans and whatever I did, like he came out as David Jones, and nobody bought the record. and then when he came out as Bowie and he did Ziggy and he created all these characters, people were interested. So it's like they didn't want to just see him as him, because he tried it and it didn't work. And Lady Gaga did the same thing. And she tried it in New York and it didn't work until she created, Lady Gaga. So it seems like even the audience wants to see a lot of times like a hyper vision of a person that's not exactly maybe them. So I think that's always been interesting. I do that with the Ghost. I mean, I play a character called Josephine Electric, who's the lead singer of my band, and she's me. But I use vocal transformers to create her character, and I kind of go into character when I do my whole thing. Is Josephine is not me, but she is me in some ways. But it's just a different way of approaching things. So I always am very interested in artists that do that. So Coma Rose, like you said, like what are your inspirations? Like if people were going to point out, like, okay, who do you think who are your influences, reference points that people could kind of understand your character?
Well, yeah, I suppose like you mentioned Lady Gaga. I mean, she's amazing. Like just from like creating this vision from the ground up involving visuals and costumes and her music, and she's essentially orchestrating this whole thing entirely on her own. I mean, I was a huge fan when I was say 13 maybe. I had another friend who was a huge fan, and he was supposed to do a presentation about her in music class, and so he was like, okay, Jacques, like I got you a Lady Gaga outfit, you're just gonna stand there while I do this presentation about Lady Gaga, and you're gonna be dressed as her. And I was like, okay, I'll just be an alien. But yeah, I mean, musically beyond that, I'm quite a fan of like witch house music, bands like Ice Peak or Rados Maya or like White Ring, Salem, all these kind of bands that I don't even know if most people know them. I mean, witch house like is considered like a bit of a joke on the mainstream, I suppose, but something about it really awakens
that's cool.
part of me.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's a different genre. I haven't really heard a lot of people tap into. Most people will say maybe like goth or they'll say like EDM or trance, but I'm or dark wave, synth wave, but I do pick it up. I mean, I pick up some Trent Reznor in your music, a little Nine Inch Nails influence a little bit, some Laurie Anderson. That's kind of a deeper influence. Like some of Eurythmics, some New Order, some spoken word in like Lou Reed esque in your spoken word piece that I was just listening to on SoundCloud. I was listening to like Drip, and I like spoken word stuff. I mean, I do a lot of that, and I'm into like guys like Dylan and Lou Reed, and it's always interesting like when you're an artist and you kind of show that more experimental side. And a lot of music today can kind of go that direction because you're allowed to, with these streaming services, be able to put out like original material. And I think that's really cool that you can see where other artists are coming from. And, you have people who are trying to be like in the mainstream, and you have other people like are more true to themselves. So when you record, you said you use like Ableton. Is that what you use?
Yeah, I use Ableton Live Suite, and I got the Ableton push just so I can feel a bit more connected to the interface.
That's cool. So do you use like MIDI keyboards to trigger your Ableton with like your computer?
Yeah, first I had a Korg keyboard that I was lent, and then I had to give it back, and and so I haven't really done that for a while, but I'm looking to buy some more gear once
Yeah.
I can set my mind on a piece.
Yeah, it's interesting because I am like an old school synthesist. Like I use hardware synths like Moogs and Rolands and stuff like that, and I'm
Mhm.
of a DAW-less recorder. So what I do is I use like old school, not exactly old school. I use like Zoom R24 digital recorders, which means that you have a machine that basically acts like a computer, but it's a recorder. It's a hardware recorder. So it's like what you would use in a big studio when they have a big deck. It kind of forces you to record without a grid, and you have to
Oh,
do overdubs and stuff. And if you're using like Moogs and analog synths, it's a good way to do experimental music because you kind of have to play the parts. You can't really go on the grid and do stuff. You have to actually play it. But yeah, I'm a keyboardist, so I like playing. But there's a lot of cool devices out there today that allow you to do what you do on a DAW as a standalone. You have things from like Akai MPCs. You have like Novation. You have grid-based inputs. Like if you weren't like a keyboard player, but you're like a hip hop person or a producer, these grids enter the notes on these pressure sensitive grids and use like Ableton or to record, but then the interface is an interface which touch sensitive and velocity sensitive pads. So you can physically put in your drum beats. You could physically put in notes and actually use your fingers without like a traditional keyboard, which is a cool method of electronic music production. It actually opens it up to people who aren't professionally trained. So it's interesting.
right. I mean, that's what I like about the Ableton Push is that you can like regulate the velocity sensitivity on the touch buttons, and so it makes it all just kind of come together. And since it's designed for the Ableton, I thought that would be a good
Yeah,
first step in terms of
yeah, it's a really
connecting with it like physically.
yeah, it's interesting because original like when the first electronic instruments were created in the 50s, like the first Moogs, they didn't have keyboards. They just had sequencers that were based on like
Right.
setting switches and buttons. And the
Mm-hmm.
first experimental electronic musicians were kind of like, we don't even need keyboards. We'll just use these alternative methods of input. And it's kind of gone back full circle where today there's tons of alternative methods of input for artists to create. And even artists like myself, I like to use these grid-based things to do things that aren't typically possible on a keyboard because you can do things on those grids that you can't do on the physical instrument. There are things I want physically that I can't do with a typical scale on a piano, but because I've got this grid, I could be doing things, hitting scales or hitting notes that you really. And so I think that gives you a lot of you start opening up the combination of the two. Is like all what electronic music is all about, like experimentation. I hear a lot of interesting stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah. Spoken word stuff to the really experimental, is that the genre that you really are electronic? Which house is that where you want to stay, or do you see yourself moving into other genres?
Well, honestly, it's hard for me to try and like remain within a genre. I kind of just go wherever the wind blows me right now. But I have been quite like I've actually got a number of tracks that are on hold right now that I'm waiting to get mastered. And once those come out, you'll see I kind of dive a bit more into the witch housey like electro punk vibe.
Oh, punk, cool.
Um,
Yeah, punk has been a big
yeah.
influence to a lot of people today. I think there's a lot more punk influence in music coming back. I've actually talked to like 4 punk rock bands, one from Australia, one from from California. Is that the last 3 bands I've talked to were coming from like a punk aesthetic, and so that's interesting to hear. They seems to be coming back.
Yeah, I suppose it comes with like some social unrest. Um, like with society, it makes sense that it would arise in times such as these.
Well, I think what I see is like, the kind of, the popular music trend to make things that are kind of like, well, they I think it's what happened when Kurt Cobain came. We had just come out of this kind of like manufactured corporate rock that was all these hair bands from Los Angeles. Not to put them down, but they were like glam kind of heavy metal, like the Rats and the Poisons and stuff. They were all kind of manufactured bands, and people wanted something more real. And Kurt Cobain and Eddie Vedder, when they brought grunge, to the stage, then it kind of opened it up to have singer-songwriters actually being honest. Kurt Cobain was probably the most honest songwriter, like one of the most that you'd ever seen. After coming from that era, he was just pure. He could put his pain into music, and people related to it. Eddie could do the same thing, and it was just interesting to see that come back. And I think when people want something, in tune with their feelings, they'll go to something that has a little more heart or honesty.
Exactly. It's so important to be able to relate to what you're listening to, that tap into that feeling of realness.
Yeah, it's just interesting today that, there's so many, some people kind of will point to the opposite. They'll say, well, I want escapism because reality is too tough. So I can see people going the other direction. You're kind of doing both because you've got this character you've created, Coma Rose, and it's got the Lady Gaga aspects, kind of got the Bowie-esque stuff, and you got the witch house. It does give you some escapism. It's kind of like sci-fi escapism. When you go watch Star Trek or Star Wars or something, you get pulled in that world because maybe your own world is a little too tough. But the thing about sci-fi, it tends to be a comment on the current times, but you're able to say things that maybe you couldn't say. Like Rod Serling in the Twilight Zone, he used to make comments in science fiction about the current day world, but because it was in science fiction, he could kind of get away with political statements that people couldn't readily. It wasn't direct; it was kind of indirect. So, do you feel that you like the nature of doing your music? Because if you do it in such a way that you can make a comment, but you maybe not be as direct as like a Bob Dylan or a Neil Young.
Oh, entirely. I mean, you've totally put your finger on that. Like, I'm so enthusiastic about fantasy realms that I swear I just read the same book over and over again just to stay within that zone, that mood that the book portrays. And so, I mean, for my entire live show, I've designed it to kind of be a commentary about like technology versus nature, and how like it's not so much about how like the result of a thing, but the means one uses to get to that point, and just generally, the destruction of it, that could be a beautiful thing, but it really depends on the use of the thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, modern technology, you can use it to like, for biodiversity, or you can use it to like destroy biodiversity.
Exactly.
You could go and take technology, and then people like overuse a resource because people overbuy something, or you could use it to like save whales or save polar bear. I mean, you could do it to all kinds of good things and bad things you can do from the result of technology. It can be used. It's a double-edged sword. In some ways, it's like, okay, you make it easy to do something, then you could actually cause a problem because it's too easy. And then, so it's always got to be used responsibly. But the problem is, like, in a capitalist system, things that are profitable aren't necessarily good. And sometimes people don't understand that. It's like, just because something makes money doesn't mean it's good. And there's a thing where, like the financial markets will say, well, if something makes money, that's got to be good, but not necessarily true. And so that's interesting that with science fiction, you can always kind of show that dystopian world. You can kind of reflect. You can say, oh, it's somewhere else, but you're really talking about here. where you're talking about some futuristic realm, but it's really still a comment about here, maybe kind of masked or layered.
Yeah.
So I was looking at your song Ambergram. Can you kind of talk about like the whole, like how you came to that song, and what you feel it's about, and how you actually constructed it? Maybe we get into it.
Sure, yeah. So that, yeah, so my latest tracks, and so that one was actually, funnily enough, I wrote a lot of the lyrics via an online word generator. I thought that would fit quite well into the whole Matrix AI vibe, which is essentially the basis for the song.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, yeah, about looking through a lens, and how that can kind of warp your perspective, and how it is all essentially a matter of perspective and the way you look at things in life. But I like to keep my lyrics quite open, in some ways like nonsensical nonsense, just to make it easy to interpret in different ways, depending on the perspective you want to use on the song. If that makes sense.
No, that's interesting. I do a lot of. I originally did poetry before I became like a musician, and so I tend to do that. This idea where I'll go back to my page. I got like hundreds of pages of poems, and then I'll say, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm doing all this electronic music. It's like I'll take a line from like 30 poems, and just randomly take a
Exactly.
line from each one. And it's kind of the same thing you did with the computer. I'll do that sometimes, and I'll do like a stream of consciousness. I have all this paper in front of my mic in my home studio, and I'll just go randomly grab lines and just throw them around. And what I find is sometimes compared to a song that I purposely tried to construct, sometimes that way of writing, especially with electronic music, tends to work. you know,
It does, yeah.
I've talked to a lot of artists that kind of do the same thing, and sometimes they'll be honest and say, they'll say, well, I really put a lot of time in this, and then they'll say, well, I actually kind of just threw it together, and I maybe did a couple passes on it, but it's like sometimes that kind of gives you this like feeling that you're not being overwrought. Not that I won't go and write a rock opera, because I do that. I'm a progressive guy, and I'll go and write like, yes, I'll do something like that. But what I find is like, it's cool to kind of do a stream of consciousness kind of word jam, poetry slam kind of way of recording. So is that like what you typically do, or that was just for that song you did it that way, or do you end up, a lot of artists have different ways of doing it. Do you put down your lyrics ahead of time, or do you do them after, or is it a combination, or you just don't know? You're just gonna each song is different. How you approach it?
Well, honestly, as somebody who enjoys writing a lot on my own time, just writing like nonsensical things, I find that most of the time, whenever I try and do that with a song, it just ends up sounding overwritten. I end up like honestly, Ivy Drip and Eye of the Storm, my first two tracks I released, those were all literally stream of consciousness,
Cool.
just chatting into the mic for the whole song, and I just kept those lyrics right there. I mean, looking back on them, some of the lyrics are actually quite embarrassing, but they just fit so well at the time. I just sort of kept them there.
That's interesting, because I'm finding more bands. I mean, I just talked to an artist from Latvia. There's an artist named Waterflower, and she's a visual artist, and she does a lot of stream of consciousness because she's a visual artist. So a lot of her act is just all these visuals that she does on a green screen, and she does a lot of YouTube videos. But she was in a band that the whole band, all they did is do the kind of poetry slams, where
love it,
and they just did it. And I mean, again, talking to more and more artists that are kind of going back to that after an age of people trying to craft like perfect songs. I think sometimes what happens is like there gets to be pressure against that to say, we wanted something more free. More freeing is to do the stream of consciousness kind of slam poetry. improvisational recording. People appreciate it because this feels like it's coming from a different place. Maybe it's not going to hit the top 10, but there's an audience for it that is looking for real, feeling.
Yeah, kind of circling back to the conversation about Kurt Cobain and Nirvana realness and whatnot.
Yeah. I really think there are people that really are itching to feel that, there's a musician that's on stage and they're actually not just running off the CDJ. Not that doesn't get you somewhere. And some actually have to do that the way the club systems are set up today, that you can't come out with like a full band. You might have to run your Ableton Live and kind of sing over it. So then the question I have, if you've done live shows, how do you have like a setup where you're just running like an Ableton Live, or do you actually play live with instrumentation or other musicians?
Me, I would sing live and like mess with some of the pre-recorded set and add some contortion choreography to it, and also some live visuals that I do myself.
Oh, cool. So you do like a visual performance, kind of like what I was talking about. There's a lot of artists doing that nowadays. I've talked to a lot of people who have a visual element to their show. So when you do your visuals, do you project them onto a screen, or you use the club's capabilities? How do you do it?
Oh yeah, it's projected. I have my own projector and Resolume Arena 6,
cool.
7.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I make them myself.
And your costumes that I've seen in your videos, did you put those together yourself, or do you work with somebody?
Oh yeah, I do it all myself. I wanted to go into set design when I was young, so I find that all my variety of different things I love to do just all sort of fit together in this one act.
Well, that's really cool, because it's cool. Like I see more and more indie groups, they kind of take in the responsibility of their image. They want to do it, in terms of like that. It's their vision. And that's the cool thing about singer-songwriters that I've always been like really into. Like most of the people I interview are singer-songwriters. I don't really interview a lot of like agents who will try to contact me and get me to push like a bigger band. But I'd rather talk to people who are kind of in the smaller bands, because I think they need the help. My whole thing is I want to support indie music and alternative music, because the whole structure for the bigger acts, it already exists. I'm trying to help the smaller acts.
Well, we appreciate it.
So everybody.
We need all the charity we can get.
Yeah, especially in this COVID time. One of the cool things that some of the things are happening, like Spotify is now putting a donation button on their anybody that's on the platform. They can put a donation button to like PayPal or GoFundMe, so the bands they can't tour. And I just got set up on mine. And SoundCloud, for a certain, the premier artist on SoundCloud, there actually is a button that you can put on your profile that will allow you to get a GoFundMe or a PayPal or Cash App. And so for a lot of bands, they're kind of stuck not being able to tour, because a lot of bands, in this world, that's the next question, is like the streaming world. Social media allows us to get out the gate, and we can get our music out there, but our compensation level is not that high. And so what I've seen is a lot of artists, they make more money on merch and doing shows than they do from selling their records through streaming. So do you, as an artist, are you like, how are you approaching like your way to actually, make it in the business? Are you doing like your shows, your primary income source, or your merch, or how do you do that?
Well, I suppose my opinion might be a bit controversial on this, because I actually quite enjoy streaming services, because I don't really find that, because it's sort of like almost what you do is pushing forward artists who don't have much means to even produce their own records, to allow them to have a platform to share their work. So even though the compensation there is quite low, I find that it still helps in a certain way. But then I feel what really needs to change is the way I guess sort of the system is surrounding artists touring, even because I find that a lot of people just end up touring for little or no money, and I think that's the main problem, because if you could tour and actually make a profit from that, it would be more worthwhile to a lot of bands who just, it's like a 5-piece traveling with a van, and they'll end up making like,
Yeah,
$100 a gig or whatnot.
yeah, just breaking even. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
the tour support is very low. I've taken the U-Haul van to New York City and played in Manhattan places, and and the compensation is like barely covers like the travel.
exactly.
Um,
Yeah, let alone like just like practicing with the band and
yeah, yeah,
all the gear and everything. It's insane.
yeah. It's really hard, and that's where these new online community. Like I just got on Twitch, and Twitch, if you become a Twitch partner, you can make a certain amount of money. You can actually get your streams to equate income. So if you can be like a
Right.
YouTuber if you can get a big enough audience.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, like the future of music, given this crisis, is really live streaming platforms that allow fans to buy tickets, which I started looking into. There are some new platforms being developed because of what's going on with the bands not being able to tour, where they are allowing you to actually like sell tickets to your live show, or have like Cash App or PayPal or different ways of doing support, so people can do like an unplugged performance from their bedroom or from their garage or from their basement, and set up a couple and their fans to support them. Then you could church or murder in the show online, and that
Right.
I've been, now there are more ways to actually make money ago. There are more ways that you can actually turn that into income. That's not the main point of being an artist. I mean, I would do my work because I don't make a lot of money from it, but I do it because I love it.
Mm-hmm.
This play anywhere, and anyhow, whether they get paid for the gig or not, just because they love it. It happens that the money comes later. Yeah, it's just cool. It would be good if the industry would just be more supportive of supporting artists. My whole comparison is a kid today will buy a $60 Xbox game, but won't pay $10 for buying an album from a band they like. So that's what they got to think about is like, if
Exactly.
you love that musician, maybe you want to make sure they're still here. And maybe you should not just buy the
Mm-hmm.
Xbox and PlayStation game and Nintendo games. You need to like think about supporting the bands you love.
Right, exactly. But then from a different perspective, one might wonder that, well, say for example, the agents or the labels, I mean, so often they'll just pay the artist so little percent compared to what they make off of their own sales. Then you think, what would these labels or agents do without the artists that support their own
Yeah.
business? But it's them making all the money in the end. So I almost feel as if the system, like say in France, for example, if you're a professional artist, it suffices to do like 40 or so gigs a year, and you get paid as a self-employed musician by the government here. And personally, I'm so surprised that doesn't just exist on a worldwide scale. I mean, it is a job
Yeah.
as any other one that takes time and effort. It's not like all fun and games when you're sitting in the studio mixing for gosh darn 2 weeks
Yeah, well,
or
I think it's like
something.
the idea that somehow art is not valued, as a job. People would say, "Oh, get a real job," but art, musicians, it is a real job, and it's just the not understanding within our economic system that being an artist isn't just some self-indulgent thing. It's people enjoy
Yeah.
art, and art should be something that you could make a living off if you're a creative person. If you're a creative person and you're not the kind of person that can sit in a cubicle and do something for corporate America, where you'd rather, work on your art and people want to hear you and want to see you, you should make a way for that person to be able to have that life. And I think it's cool that France, they have that because there's a lot of people that are really not built to do the other type of work, and they're not happy doing it. They're happy doing creative work, and it would be better to allow people to be where they want to be. My 2 cents on that.
Oh no, entirely. I mean, exactly. I mean, that's why sometimes, like, as much as I want to cry out, like, support the artists you like, sometimes I understand that just regular public doesn't have quite the means to help support us, but they should also be entitled to enjoy some form of entertainment, which is why I feel like the government should take that on a bit more, since, I mean, they obviously need artists to make their, country beautiful and like culturally intact. I mean, in Berlin, they purposefully keep their rent and other amenities low to keep that artistic public there.
That's really I love the idea. Like in Berlin, I've talked to some bands from there that actually have kind of told me about that whole environment that is supportive of the community. It's kind of like what San Francisco was, in the '60s. Like Haight-Ashbury. There was that kind of thing. It just happened to be, and now it's like priced out. You can't do it. But
not anymore.
But the whole era of the Grateful Dead, and bands like Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, they came from an era where you could, have 4 or 5 artists living in an apartment complex, all hanging together, and it wasn't crazy rent, and you could actually do it. And that's the kind of thing that people don't. In this country, in the U.S., it's kind of hard to get people to value art. They'll say, "Oh, when are you going to grow up and get a real job?" They don't. They don't see it as, as something that's valuable. And I just think that what I've seen, and I understand the fans have limited income, but it's the whole thing I saw. Being 50 years old, I grew up in an age where if you wanted to listen to something, you had to buy the vinyl, right? You had to buy the cassette. You enjoyed picking out the bands you loved, and you did kind of support them in that way. And I understand the world's changed and made it easier for you to listen to stuff, but it's kind of devalued music, and so there's got to be a way to get the value of music back into the equation, where people are willing to understand that there's certain level of participation from even the fans that's required for your bands. And this whole crisis is going to really exacerbate that. And it's going to be a point where, people are going to have to support some of these bands that are not coming back. That's just the reality. But yeah. So on the project you have on SoundCloud, you have Ambergram, you have Eye of the Storm, and IV Drip. You said you're holding off on putting more material because you're mastering some.
Yeah, I've got about like 7 tracks on hold right now that I'm just waiting to release. So I'll be looking forward to showing the world my new things I've been working on for like the last few months. I've been locked in
cool.
here.
Are you going to do videos for all those too? Or are you going to do more video work?
Well, so that's the thing. Yeah, I generally prefer releasing every song with a bit of a video to sort of put you in that universe I'm trying to create. And I feel like it just helps people understand a bit from my own perspective, at least. I do have a couple videos also on hold. It's a bit easier for me to make than the songs a lot of the time, since I come from more of a visual background professionally.
I like your videos. I was watching your YouTube. So what we're gonna do with this whole podcast, what's cool about it is I can actually link to your SoundCloud. I can put a link into the actual podcast, and or link to your main all your links to your YouTube and your SoundCloud, and any other link like your main website are actually clickable on the podcast itself. And we are on 11 platforms, and Spotify. Anchor is actually part of the Spotify family. So this podcast is actually going to have a link on Instagram that will allow people to hit the highlight, and it'll go right to the podcast version on Spotify. So this will be published within like an hour. And then we will put it up. We usually put the hyperlink onto our highlight on our Instagram site, which is Expansive Sound Experiments. And we will put that link there. It doesn't, you can actually do the same thing. If you have your Instagram, you have a Spotify, you could do that linkage. It will let you do it. So yeah, it's just cool. You just go to the podcast and then it will let you like share it. And then you can share it to many platforms, including Facebook and other places. But yeah, we'd love to talk to you again when your projects are available. We tend to have people come on the show multiple times. So like when you have more material on SoundCloud and your video is ready to go for your next set of singles, we definitely love to have you come back on the show.
Oh, super. Thank you so much for having me. I really like that.
We've been interviewing people at least 3 or 4 times a week now because we're kind of like on lockdown. We've been recording a lot ourselves. We're trying to do a bunch of things. But yeah, like as musicians, we found this platform as another way to generate income and also be able to talk to other musicians. And it's just really cool to be able to talk to people. I mean, most of the people I've talked to in the last 3 weeks, it's been really cool. I mean, I talked to a lady, Jen Eagle. She's a model and electronic musician. She's in Denmark. I talked to a lady in Latvia. I'm talking to you in France. Is this cool that the technology allows us to have these podcasts that, years ago they would not be able to do that. So I think that's along with the streaming services where we are as musicians, even though we're in this lockdown situation, there are a lot of things we can do that we can.
Almost kind of work.
Get out there. So I'm hoping this will really help, and everybody should go out to your SoundCloud, Coma Rose, and check out your tracks. Your latest single is Ambigram, right? That's the latest one, right? Yeah, check that out. It's really awesome, and I just encourage people to share your love for the artist you like, and give love to Coma Rose, and we'll hopefully talk to you when you have your other material ready, and we're going to put this out, and have a great day.
Yes, thank you so much, sir.
Soon. Bye.